Welcome to the Behavioral View, presented by CentralReach. Join hosts, Dr. Shannon Hill and Dr. Nissa Van Etten, as they explore cutting-edge topics in behavior analysis with expert guests. Stay informed, stay inspired. This is the Behavioral View.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Behavioral View. I am Shannon Hill, Editor-in-Chief at CentralReach Institute, and we are here today with an all-CR panel, introducing you to yet another one of our amazing behavior analysts working at CR. But first, let's do our traditional path of introductions here. Nissa, you want to say hi?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Nissa Van Etten. I'm the Director of Clinical Training and CR Institute. I need to change that. That's a mouthful. Every time.
So many words. And we also have Liz, who, if you guys are repeat watchers, you're going to be seeing Liz 2 months in a row. So say hi, Liz.
Yes. Hi. Hopefully again. I am a clinical AI solutions architect at CentralReach. And yeah, 4 months in, really excited to have an opportunity to chat today. We've got a good topic. So
Don't we though? And the person bringing us this great topic is our new friend, Haley. Haley, you want to say hi and just a little bit about what you do here?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm Haley Scheer, and I am 2 months in as a clinical AI solutions specialist. Happy to be here.
So if you were paying attention, audience, we're bringing you the cool techie people, the behavior analysts that are bridging that field between using their behavior analytics skills for technology work. And we know that a lot of you are interested in how you take your BCBA training and use it in other places and other fields. So we just thought we would talk about that and share the personal experiences that we have here in this team. Haley, in particular, had a really interesting career progression story. So you want to just give a little tidbit about what your history is and how you ended up here?
Yes, I'll try and keep it brief. I started in the field of ABA back in 2016 and worked my way up as BCBA and then a manager. I was running an ABA department at a multidisciplinary clinic and doing a lot of collaboration with other disciplines, speech, OT, PT. And after a couple of years in that role, I decided I was ready for some change. And something big that had been on my mind was, I think probably everyone here can relate, this sentiment that BCBAs often get pigeonholed. And as we go through our training programs and education, we're kind of funneled into the field of autism care, which I have loved and have absolutely no regrets. But I think we forget how applicable our skills are to other fields. I mean, we study the science of behavior. And so that prompted me to start questioning how else could I use this skill set, this hard-earned skill set. And as I was doing a little bit of soul searching, I started taking actually participating in these UX research studies. So I would, for example, test out VR headsets, and it's kind of great. I would go test some VR headsets, play some games, play some Beat Saber, and then just give a bunch of feedback on it. And along the way, I talked to a couple of people who kept bringing up UX design, and I thought, well, that's really cool. I love that, but I do not have a creative background. And then I started thinking, well, hey, what about these people that are collecting data on me when I'm testing the VR headsets? That would be cool. And so that led me to the field of UX research, which I would argue has so many transferable skills or overlapping concepts as the field of ABA. You're essentially measuring and understanding user behavior. So you're taking all of your tools and techniques from being a BCBA, and you're just applying it to a different population. You're looking at users and how they interact, whether it be with a website or a product or even a process. And so went down that rabbit hole and ended up at a nonprofit health tech startup doing some UX research. And that introduced me to the world of AI. And so it turns out I just have an affinity for trying to figure out how BCBAs can use their skills in other fields.
I love that. I love the story. And for our listeners or watchers, we're going to deep dive into that use case. But I thought it's a good question of the day, right? Since all of us are working in atypical positions for BCBAs. Curious, Liz and Nissa, how did you end up where you are now?
Here, I can jump in. So I, prior to working at CentralReach, was working at an ABA company overseeing training, compliance, and quality. And, it's interesting because I had a chance to wear many, many hats at the organization that I was at for almost 10 years. And I've just always found that I like to be doing different things and learning new things, especially. And interesting enough, I actually, in my role, was using CentralReach's products. And so I actually happened to come across the position and just really got excited about the opportunity to apply what I had been doing, at my previous organization, trying to identify ways that we could improve the, clinicians' experience. So much of what we're able to do sometimes can be, limited by, just some of the administrative tasks that have to be done. And so anything we can do to just improve that experience for the clinicians ultimately helps the clients that were being served. So a large part of my role was trying to develop systems and tools that would better serve the clinicians and ultimately the clients. And so, like I said, I came across the position at CentralReach and it just really made sense. I was just really excited to have the opportunity to apply my clinical expertise, my leadership expertise to the products that CentralReach is offering. And so it really just made sense. I came across the role, the clinical AI solutions architect position, and was just immediately excited because, I have that firsthand experience of knowing what it's like to be a clinician, knowing what it's like to be in a leadership role where you really want to do everything you can to make the BCBAs and RBTs positions easier so that way our kiddos can get the best service. And so having all that experience with CentralReach prior, I just knew that it was going to be a really good opportunity for me to have a greater reach in terms of making, everyone's jobs easier.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I will answer briefly because my story really isn't that long. But I like to say that I've made a career out of being an edge case. So I always worked in very small population idea, so either intellectual disabilities with sexual behaviors or Prader-Willi syndrome or, and I think after 30 years of doing all of that, and my last little bit was doing school-based consultation, writing FBAs and such, and just the stress, what I learned and what many people I know talk about in behavior analysis is it's a very different thing to run a business than it is to just be a BCBA. And I did not like the business side of it. I hated it. I'm a nonprofit girl by heart. I want to give everything away. Um, and so I decided, okay, if I'm going to keep doing this, maybe this is my pro bono side. I need something that's going to actually be something that lets me use my skill set for something that I care about, but that also is steady and doesn't require me to develop this other business set of skills that just bore me. Um, and so for me, that was professional development. I've always done so much professional development and love that piece. So CentralReach was recruiting, and it happened to be a good match. How about you, Nissa?
Oh, I don't even know what day of the week it is. How did I get here? It has been a journey. And I think for me, for this role and this organization, and I love CentralReach, is really that lifelong learner. I think that's what kind of helped me get here, is like understanding I've been in this space. I think everyone that's listened in understands I've been here since I was 17. I've been in the field since I knew what work was, since I was an undergrad. And the progression, right, was to be a tutor back then, that we didn't have the 3-tiered model, and then to get my master's and become a BCBA and oversee a caseload. And I think naturally, as the field has progressed, I just had a lot of years under my belt. So moved into leadership positions, clinical director, regional clinical director. And then at that time, private equity started becoming a player in the space. And when PE came in at an org that I was at, there was the opportunity to level up into an executive behavior analyst role, which is a weird title, but really it meant I was a behavior analyst on the executive team. So I did have a lot of what your not your favorite part is, Shannon, like that business, that understanding of like, what are the numbers to keep an office open? How many learners and staff need to come in to maintain the EBITDA in that region and location? And so that led me to kind of that leadership opportunity, but my mind is very process oriented. So always learning about process and business. And I think by way of my history in working in the space and working with Dr. Partington, CentralReach acquired the Ables and AFOL. It worked out that they needed someone to kind of lead that product, and kind of joined the CentralReach team in that capacity. But I think the thing that I've learned in the business of ABA, because we know it is now a business, unfortunately, is that we all have to be lifelong learners. And if there's a niche or an area that we want to move into, we just have to be open-minded to learning. And when you're learning and it's a new niche, you are going to be the novice and leaning into colleagues who are the experts to teach you to level up. I know that kind of goes off topic, but I think that's a big piece for me, right? Have our listeners who are like, how do you leave the clinical space? And I will have to say, I still work clinically because I do think that there is a piece of my heart that is always in these services to children with autism that I just could never leave.
Yeah. I know, and I don't think you're off topic at all, because, as Haley and I were kind of talking about what this session will be, it's this even divide about the UX side of things and how that relates to behavior analysis, but also it's about bringing your skill set into other opportunities. So I think that's interesting. And even as Liz was talking, I was thinking, man, you and I should probably talk about the people that we hire, because I know people want to know, how do I get hired? And none of us can tell that story, but you and I can talk a little bit about how we hire. And I don't know about you, Nissa, but for me, so much of it has to do with what you were just describing. Is this a person who has continued to grow their skill set, who has found ways to use their behavior analytics skills to teach themselves other things? Are they to be a good behavior analyst is the minimum standard to get a job outside of being a BCBA, I think. You've got to come and they've got to rely on you that your clinical skills are what they are, and they are what they should be. But what else have you done? What else have you really developed an expertise in? And what gets you passionate? What makes you really look forward to your day at work? How can you shape that into something different if that's what you're looking for? And I know that you said that about loving to stay attached to the field, and I know a lot of us do in one way or another. So this is not to try to tell everybody to leave autism services.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. But sometimes after a certain amount of time, that we want to use another part of our brain. I don't think that's anything bad. Yeah. Okay. Pivot. A lot of the time, what we're doing at CentralReach, at least in the institute, in our little part of it, the AI world, the institute world, is we're looking for products that are going to make your lives as practitioners, administrators, easier and more useful. And so that has we spend a lot of time thinking about, from the viewpoint of a behavior analyst or an administrator, how do we want this to function? What do we need it to do? But there's a whole other piece beyond. You can write, just like you can write the most beautiful behavior plan in the world. If it is complex, if it is clunky, if it is 50,000 pages long, and if it's not reinforcing to the person implementing it, they're probably not going to do it. And so the same kind of things happens whenever we are designing those interfaces for people to use our software or our AI product or whatever we're building. And so, Haley, that was a lot, I think, of what you were doing with your research. Am I right, or am I overreaching?
You're definitely right. That was a lot of it. With UX research, there's so much opportunity. I think it's easy to focus specifically on web-based products or technology, but it's more of a philosophy about understanding the user experience with anything. So it can be with products, it can be with processes. And I think that's really an interesting area when we explore how that translates to ABA. For the product side of things, there's so much applicable from behavior analysis when we look at what shapes a user's experience. We can explore, does this product meet their needs? How does it fit into their workflow? We can explore how usable it is, how long it takes, how easy it is to use. So there's a lot of different avenues for exploration with that. And that's exciting to me. I one of the projects I actually did was started to think about all these UX research concepts and how they could apply to something within the clinical realm. And so I approached one of the former clinics that I worked at and pitched this project to do a UX research study on a clinical and administrative handbook, because a common thing that we see in UX research or product spaces more generally is that somebody will come up with a great idea and think that it fits everyone's needs. Mm-hmm. So there's this idea that, like, we are not the user, and that's really what validates the need for UX research, is if we're building top down without getting that feedback and really looking at what's happening on the ground, how is this going to fit into a user's world, it's not going to meet their needs.
Do I hear you actually saying, without saying my favorite two words in ABA, social validity?
I could talk about that forever. I ironically, I was looking for an avenue to explore outside of ABA, and I have just full circle found myself hardcore diving back into ABA through everything that I do. And if anything, it has just made me wish that I had all this information when I was practicing BCBA, because I think it would have made me a much better BCBA. I think exposure to fields outside of our little clinical bubble is so useful. It makes us more well-rounded. One thing I think a lot about, and please cut me off if I'm rambling, but is just this idea that as behavior analysts, we tend to have our own rigidity in a lot of ways. It's a safe space, I promise.
Shannon is shocked.
But we just desperately want to stay in this safe world of black and white and what we can measure and what we cannot. And so exposure to the philosophy and methodologies of UX research, even though if you break them down to their core, a lot of them are the exact same as the tools we're using in ABA, there's a lot more fluidity and flexibility and willingness to look at that qualitative data, attitudinal data, thoughts, beliefs, and we can ignore that all we want, but it's still impacting behavior. Mm-hmm. And I think that lens is really useful.
All right, I'm going to pause for just a moment to do secret word number 1, victory. VICTORY, victory. Okay. Maybe you can give us some examples. I should have said that before I did the secret word so that you'd have time to pull them to mind. So I'm babbling just a moment to let you have a second. Okay. Do you have any examples for us, Haley?
Are you looking for examples of social validity related, or just looking at more broad level what I mean when I talk about the overlap between UX research and ABA?
Yeah, I don't want to exclude Nissa and Elizabeth here, but what I was gravitating toward was more about, you said there are things that you learned there that would have made you a better behavior analyst. And I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, I think a lot about the one thing that's really common in UX research is qualitative, in-depth interviews. And we do some of that in ABA, especially when we're doing caregiver interviews or intakes and things like that. But in UX research, there's this idea of exploring the underlying attitudes and thoughts and beliefs, and really developing intense empathy for the user that you're interviewing. The goal is to completely understand the context in which they might be needing a certain product, and to really refine that empathy. So you're looking at things like, where are they experiencing pain points currently? What needs do they have? What wants do they have? And, it's not to say that behavior analysts don't do that. I think we try, but sometimes we're lacking either the confidence or the training to really go deeper than just, does your child engage in challenging behaviors? What does that look like? And instead, getting much deeper, there's a framework that I really liked. A UX researcher, I think her name's Nikki Anderson. She calls it the TED-W. And it's just talk me through is the T. So talk me through a time when this was happening. Explain how something was happening. Describe a time when something was happening, and then walk me through. And they're so simple, but they're an opening. They allow a lot more. And I think if you're approaching those interviews with your main goal to develop empathy for the person sitting across from you, and explore not only their pain points, but what are their wants and needs, I think that translates to better care overall for their child, and a better relationship working with them.
If I could have an emoji right now, it's the emoji with like the mind blown.
Yeah.
Because I honestly think about interactions I've had with a number of our colleagues here at CentralReach when we talk about, just the pain points of our customers and what product do they need and what supports they need. It really is very similar to meeting a family for the first time and trying to understand, like, why did you come in for ABA services? So I love that TED-W. I wrote that down because I think when we talk about compassionate care and understanding, walking in the shoes of the families we serve, it's the number one, number two words that they talk about are open-ended questions, right? Open-ended, just making sure that you give them a platform to share their burdens so that you can understand how to support them better. But I'm mind blown because it's just amazing that in this type of research, which is a very, like, if you're a behavior analyst, you would never imagine this is a parallel world. But you are sharing with our listeners how parallel this world actually is, and that there is a crosswalk into that type of world for them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think a lot about in UX research, one of the guidelines is to ask for very specific instances, because our verbal communication is not always the most reliable to discover those underlying wants and needs and attitudes and beliefs. And that's really where we're uniquely positioned to have a strength in this area, because we work with a population that doesn't always use vocal verbal behavior to communicate. And so we've developed tools to understand contingencies and environmental factors that shape that behavior. And that translates so beautifully into UX research, because when you're doing these interviews, you're actually not supposed to ask, like, okay, tell me, what are your pain points? Or what do you like? If you could have a product, what would it be? Because chances are, like, they don't know. So you really need to use some of that behavior analytic lens of and to think creatively about how could I elicit this information without asking directly. And that's a fun challenge.
So how did you solve that challenge? I was curious as you were talking, how do you create the conditions where you get the information? And maybe this is related, but when you were going through the TED-W, you said talk me through and walk me through. So I'm curious, what's the difference between talk me through and walk me through?
They're just multiple exemplars of open-ended questions that are designed to get the user thinking in that step-by-step framework, rather than just being like, how do you use this product?
Yeah.
You could say, talk me through the last time you logged onto this app. And, using as much detail, walk me through step by step the actions that you took to accomplish this task. And so that's helpful in behavior analysis, because I mean, I don't know about you all, but I've had experiences where I've asked a family, we're doing an intake and I've asked, does your child engage in any unsafe behaviors? And the answer is no, absolutely not. And then we start services and find out that we are seeing quite a few unsafe behaviors. And so then you circle back to the family and say, all right, I'm noticing this. Talk me through the last time you had to tell your child no for something that they really wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Boom, you're going to get a different answer.
Very specific.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah. And I like that you attach multiple exemplars in here, because I do wonder sometimes if we forget to do that in our interviews as well. And that's something that when we're delivering treatment, we're really good at, right? But when soliciting information, verbal information from others, do we look for these multiple exemplars, or do we just assume that because you're an adult that you're going to tell me everything that I need to know in one sentence?
I have a question. For these individuals who are working in this role, is there a script? What's that training look like, right? Because they've got to gather information from within research. And we know in our field, again, different field, but similar processes where we might have a script or some role play or some recommendations. But what does that look like for them in terms of their training experience?
Are you talking more generally about transitioning into the field, or looking at how they might approach gathering this information for a specific use case?
I think the latter.
The latter. Yeah. It's funny. There's like guidelines around pairing, right? You start off with some light fluff, some conversational fluff, if you will, to make the participant comfortable. And then oftentimes it will be either something like a semi-structured interview where you maybe have a couple of question themes, but a lot of it is flexible enough that you can follow the lead of the participant. You could have a fully structured interview as well, but I think there's a lot more comfort in the realm of UX research to be less scripted and to just follow the direction of the participant. Usually when you're preparing that, you're developing a research plan, which is really like our treatment plan. There's goals and objectives. You have your data collection methods specified. You have the outcomes you're trying to achieve, and you would use those core research questions to help guide the development of, you could call it a moderator guide or an interview protocol that you're going to use.
When you talk about this, it reminds me of something that's been a frustration, a pet peeve of mine. And I've probably said it at some point in time on the behavioral review, but the Vineland. Most behavior analysts administer the Vineland incorrectly. And I'm not picking on behavior analysts. Most humans who administer it as some sort of very long, arduous checklist looking for a basal and a ceiling. And I've even seen some people just hand the protocol over to the family to just fill it out, or teacher or whatever. But you're really missing an opportunity, because if you actually get trained to administer the Vineland interview style, where you just have certain main questions that you start with and then drill down to get the specifics. You find that you get all of this information for free without having to ask every single question. They'll answer in bundles of questions at the same time. And this, I'm sure it's the same with the ABLES.
And I don't want to burst your bubble, but what you know of the Vineland, what it is now, is just emailing a link to a family.
That's terrible.
Parent
Just
information.
showing how old I am. Yeah.
But it truly is just please fill out this link. And then it becomes a, hey, parent, I'm writing your re-auth. Do you mind filling out the link so I can get the report? So I had that same experience with the quality of life scale that was developed in the past, where we had practitioners, we sent them the scale, and we had trained the practitioners, please sit down with your families during parent training and ask these questions. They're very difficult questions to digest if you send it to them without having a conversation. An organization I was at, they just PDF sent it on over and said, please get this back to me as soon as possible. And we had a number of families that came back and said, after 2 questions, I quit because it made me super frustrated. So yeah, on that topic, I think that there's a lot to be learned from, what you're sharing, Haley, in regards to how we approach this open-ended resource information gathering with families that we serve. And I think we can do the same for supervisees and those that we train, really building rapport, getting to know them, asking very pointed, individualized questions so that we can build a plan to support.
And the other interesting thing from these interviews and more of the guidance from the UX research perspective is leaning in to the behavioral cues that you observe during the interview. So actually, if there's any emotion word that is expressed, that could be a little crumb that you follow, could be an opening. If they're giving off nonverbal cues of discomfort, or you ask them to talk through their the last time they used this product and they start expressing frustration, you lean into that and use that to gain better information, because those are all those hidden cues that can help uncover those underlying attitudes and beliefs that we're not even necessarily aware of when we're just communicating.
Was it all kind of interview based? Was there any direct observation of using the products?
Yeah, so contextual inquiry is a methodology in UX research where you observe a user in their natural environment with the product that you're exploring, or a process, for example. And this is something where I feel like it's so applicable to our service delivery model. Going and observing your behavior technicians. We do a lot of versions of this, but approaching it from that lens of, you can collect all these usability metrics of how long does it take them to complete something? How long does it take them to find something? And what comes to mind for me is when I was practicing BCBA and would update a program or I would update a behavior plan and attach it on CentralReach, like, could a new BT find that? How did it fit into their workflow of direct therapy? And you get a lot of interesting data that way. Same goes for parent training. There's so much opportunity, but yes, there is a term for it. Again, there's like one-to-one mapping a lot of times of ABA and UX research.
Doing the same thing and calling it something different.
Right? Yeah.
What we're known for.
I was actually going to ask, I'm really curious to know what you found maybe a little bit more difficult, or maybe where they're difficult in terms of transitioning.
Yes. Transitions are hard. We know that. We work every day with clients, supporting them through transitions, and I think we sometimes forget that we go through those same difficulties as well. The hardest part, the imposter syndrome is real, I think, with any kind of new transition, no matter where you end up. And the other thing that comes to mind for me is when you leave the bubble of ABA and you have to explain to the rest of the world what ABA is. And I would get into the situation where I was like, this makes so much sense. Don't you see? I am perfect for this because of X, Y, and Z. And people don't know what ABA is. And so that's the other thing that I think behavior analysts in general have room for growth with, is being able to talk about what we do in a way that is accessible to the rest of the world, and being able to tell your story and show that your skills are transferable. I mean, to your point, Shannon, social validity again. Like
Yeah.
we need to be able to accurately express what our strengths are so that the world can benefit from them.
I know that a lot of the folks who do OBM have said similar things, right? That they've had to really sell themselves as consultants on organizational behavior because nobody knows what a behavior analyst is. But the other thing that was that I was on a flight, a really long flight, like a 6-hour flight, and the woman next to me was chatty, which usually I'm just like, don't. But she was interesting, and we ended up talking for 6 full hours because she had a son who had disabilities, and I told her what I do, but I never said I was a behavior analyst. I just described what I do, or I did before I moved on. And at like 3 hours into the conversation, she says, "So tell me, what do you think of ABA?"
Wow.
Yeah, and I'm like, "Well, I'm thinking about Pat Fryman saying we have a PR problem, people." Yeah,
Yes.
we do. There's lots of room. So do you have any magic words that you have learned to convey?
I started off doing a lot of informational interviews. I, approached a new challenge through collecting data. And so I talked to as many BCBAs that I could find in other industries as possible, and just collected data on what their stories were and how they spoke about it. And that helped me shape my own story. And practice makes perfect, right? It's a skill that is underutilized for us. We, in our little bubble world of ABA, we don't often have to explain who we are and what we do. And that's a skill that without practice, we won't develop.
One of my favorite assignments that I provide apprentices that I supervise, so those accruing supervision hours, and then anyone that comes into my intro course at the master's level, is an elevator speech. So it's like okay, you're going to do your baseline. You have 5 minutes, record it, and you might be clunky and feel uncomfortable. You're new to this. This is also a recording, which a lot of students and apprentices have a difficult time with. At the onset of a course, and then after the course, or at the end of a period of time as an apprentice, I want you to re-record it, and now you have a time limit of 2 minutes. And you need to be concise, and you cannot use technical language. And to watch these videos from like baseline to whatever length of time in between is really fun. But it's also one I've done for myself. No one else gets to watch these, and I think it's comfortable and they're weird. But I think that between you, Haley, and Pat Fryman, like, we do have a PR problem. We have a difficult time communicating what we do beyond autism. And I think that's why we have this niche and this very limited scope. And then we've got students and practitioners coming out that can only speak as it relates to autism, which again is a PR problem for our field. And then it limits the ability to move into other fields as well. So I think it's something, if you're listening, this is a good practice for you. If you want to role play it, I'm happy to hop on with you.
I mean, I'm really having trouble not asking you to tell us your 2-minute.
I'm gonna need some practice, but practice and I have not done it in a while. I'll do an old video if I can find it.
Awesome. No, I used to, because when I was working in schools, I had to sit down with a student and explain to them who I am and what I'm here for. So I found my favorite words for that. My problem is now. No one understands what I do now. Yeah, I actually was listening to my parents try to describe what I do to a friend of theirs. I'm like, I wish I had videotape right now. This is amazing. I'm doing such an awful job of describing my job.
I feel like so many of us would watch that on like TikTok and Instagram. If we could just get our spouses to talk about what we do, our great friends, like, give me a 10-second. What is it that I do for a living?
What do you
And then
Yeah.
that would be the impetus for us to change our own behavior.
Right. 100%. That's such a good metric. And I think a good exercise is practice applying the concepts of ABA to other use cases. So when you're listening to your spouse or your friends talk about what they do, see if you can make that connection of, are there any principles of behavior that you can recognize in there? What contingencies are in place that are shaping their behavior? And that will also help support the skill development of being able to explain what you do and translate it into a new field.
Yeah.
Part of my process was having to develop a portfolio of case studies. And one thing I struggled with is I really wanted to tell the story from the clinical lens, because that is how I experienced at least these particular ones that I'm talking about. But that would only resonate with another BCBA. So how do you translate a use case that's clinical in nature and apply all these new concepts? So, an in-home observation becomes contextual inquiry and things like that, and building up fluency. Can you tell that story in another language, essentially?
That is fascinating. Pausing for a second, though. Second secret word is children, CHILDREN, children. I absolutely adore what you just said. And for people who maybe aren't even interested in changing fields, I challenge you to do this in lots of places in your own life. I am by no means a perfect human being, but one thing that I committed to probably 5 or 6 years ago was I started to really hear my own vocabulary and my own negativity about certain people and the way they behaved and that sort of thing. And I thought, I'm slipping into huge judgmentalism, and that's not who I want to be or what I want to do. And I started trying to think about when someone was annoying me, breaking it down into the ABCs of behavior, bringing in my context and what I know about their context. And it has made a huge difference in the amount of time that I feel stressed out about other people's behavior. Now, I still complain about other people's behavior. I want to be clear about that. But I think I do it way less than I used to. And I feel like the quality of my relationships is better. So I think that is just, our science is so big and it is so useful for so many applications. Please let's don't do what you said before and just pigeonhole ourselves as service providers for one population. We're not even just service providers.
Yeah, there's so much opportunity.
Liz, I feel like I have not carved out enough room for you in this
Oh no,
conversation.
you're soaking it all in. This is honestly, I'm over here, I'm taking notes because this is really good. It's really insightful.
Yeah. What's really resonating with you on what you're hearing?
I'll be honest, I had no idea the extent to which there was crossover. You kind of mentioned just kind of the, how some of even just the terminology matches up with words and terms that we use in our field. So, that I found really interesting and intriguing. I think, it's like I said, I think, in terms of like finding this, coming across this role, it kind of just happened. But I think, Nessa, you mentioned this, just the importance of lifelong learning. And I think when I listened to you, Haley, talk about how, as a UX researcher, you have just learned so much and had the opportunity to kind of see the crossover. And I think I'm just kind of, I think it's a further example of how beneficial it can be to our own personal growth, to explore other fields And I think that that's a big thing. I think that that's just really, really important, right? Just that growth opportunity there for both personally and professionally. So that's something I think I really kind of, that resonates with me or that I hold on to. So
And it's one of those things that in years past we've kind of been discouraged from doing too. And to hear Haley talk about this, that it's not just her bringing her expertise to help the world of UX researchers. She's learned a lot that she can bring back into practice as a behavior analyst from this other field. And how often we're now talking to so many different people with so many different backgrounds to learn things like, compassionate service provision. What does rapport building really look like? So much is available to us from other people's work and other people's literature. I think it's kind of sad, although I think I understand how it got to that point of you'll stay within the behavior analytic literature for everything. As a maturing field, I'm glad that we're now backtracking on that and saying that you should be reading outside the field.
you're making me think too a lot about, we are often saying, stay within scope, stay within scope. So I think that plays a huge part of it, right?
Yeah. Balancing scope with perspective.
And let learning and curiosity. I think that the curious mindset that served me well, being in the multidisciplinary world. Some of my best friends were OTs and PTs and speech therapists, and just getting to collaborate on one case together and learn from them. That's probably where that little seed was planted, and I accessed some reinforcement for that and said, hey, I'm going to keep exploring.
Such a good point. Yeah, there's so many parallels here. All right, we're coming towards the end. I do want to, because you asked me early on, so I'm going to come right back to my favorite topic for the end. Is there anything about social validation that you haven't told us yet that was originally when you asked me which way to go? We went another way, so leaving room for that.
Yeah, I think there's so much that can be taken from this concept of the user experience and applied to social validity. In UX research, we have the qualitative, so we have the interviews, but we also have things like usability tests, surveys, and really that marrying of qualitative and quantitative data is the goal. If you can validate the data through getting the quantitative part, then you can really get more in depth with the qualitative. And I think about how, we have a tendency to be so prescriptive in nature as behavior analysts, and how might we is a question that's used very often in the user experience world to solve problems. How might we do this? And so how might we evaluate what the user experience is of the family, of the direct care staff, and looking not only at that experience with something like a behavior plan, right? So what does that look like at home? How easy is that for the family to implement? Does it meet their wants and needs? Does it solve their pain points? But also looking at it from a process standpoint of what is their experience going through the process of getting ABA services, and where are the pain points within that process? Same thing can be done for the behavior technicians. Where are the pain points in their daily process of providing the service? What are their wants and needs? And so using the regular check-ins of maybe doing a follow-up kind of version of an intake interview, getting really in depth with what a family's experience has been with services to date. Like in caregiver training, we don't always need to just be giving information. We can also listen and recruit information and that feedback loop, and then we can iterate. This idea of iteration and it being a shared process between the person creating the experience and the person receiving that experience and that cycle. That is the mindset we should be using. It should never be static. We should always be iterating.
I think you just made our social media clip for this
That was
episode.
beautiful.
I'm looking at
Thanking her so much. Are we wrapping up or are we just starting?
Yeah.
Drink coffee. No.
Haley, this has been so much fun, and I just appreciate everything that you have brought to the table. I never in a million years, when we first started talking about this episode, would have predicted how much it was going to be behavior analysis learning from other experiences rather than the opposite. But this is fascinating to me, and I hope that you will be joining us on future episodes of the what am I doing? The behavioral view. No one knows what I do. I don't know what I do.
We've only just scratched the surface. I could talk about this all day, and that passion extends to AI. I mean, all these same connections of the principles of behavior that go into shaping AI. It's amazing. So, yeah, the curiosity mindset that Nissa highlighted on is key. That's where the magic happens.
Haley, when you were talking about kind of translating some of the language of the work that we do to UX research, I thought about a paper by, I think it's Joe Sheehan and Tracy Sheehan. I believe it's out of UNT. And it was a paper written in maybe 2020 talking about translating behavior analytic language into just everyday jargon. It's a great reference. It's a nice one for you to provide like any practitioner who is new to the field, because when you come out of school, right, you want to use your language and build that skill set. But then when you go and meet families or other colleagues in other fields like engineers, I know we work a lot with engineers and product and design teams, using that language is very confusing. So I really like that you talked about that little kind of crosswalk into how to have those conversations with those colleagues.
That is so, yeah, I think that's a great skill set to have and something that we should be practicing. I would love to read that article.
Liz, I'm curious too, with you moving into the AI field, and you're doing a lot of prompting now, engineering. And I'm curious, like, are you like me? I have been amazed at how my skills in behavior analysis have translated into creating prompts for generative AI.
Absolutely. I find that it's something I really enjoy doing, actually. I love, writing down very specifically what is the exact outcome that we're seeking, right? So yeah, I actually find that it feels very natural to do it, and I enjoy it, and it absolutely requires those clinical skills that we have, right, in terms of being able to be very clearly defined, defining things very clearly.
Yeah, and I think we talked early on, like, if you can write a good task analysis, then you can write a good prompt. But I'm the more complex it gets in our use cases, I'm finding more and more that it's not just a task analysis. It is that ability to do a component analysis and really break down why is it making this error? What information does it not have? What am I assuming that it can do that it probably can't do? And I feel like I'm actually using my ABA skill set, and maybe I'm not as far away from being a behavior analyst as I sometimes proclaim to be, since I'm not actually practicing anymore. It goes back to what Haley was saying earlier. This is a way of thinking. It is a way of using your training, and it goes everywhere with you.
Mm-hmm. It really does.
There's a lot to be said on that topic. I think on the heels of the CASP conference and listening to their AI and machine learning talk at the very end and talking about the guidelines coming out soon, one of the two recommendations they made to the field that I'll carry over that I remember hearing were, one, vendors like ourselves writing white papers on how we design some of the tools that we design. Could be left for another whole conversation on the behavioral view. But the other one is more training on prompt engineering, cross between AI and ABA, and understanding how if behavior analysts and technicians will be using these tools, they just need AI literacy, right? They just need to understand, here is the definition of this term, here is what is available, and here's how you should choose to use it, as well as safeguard the use case. So I think there's a lot on that topic coming out of understanding, sort of that prompt engineering component. But I always think of being conceptually systematic, right? Being very clear in my recommendations to the GPTs and the Claudes and the tools that I use to say, this is exactly what I want. And if you're coming back with the wrong output, I'm not as kind as I might be to him. And wrong. It's wrong. No, that's. And then I provide a more clear prompt. Was I not clear? And I go back and I try and understand, what did I say that made you go the wrong direction? Because you are wrong.
But it also does well with reinforcement, Nissa, because when you say, yes, this is exactly what I want, here's multiple exemplars of when you did it right. Try to do it like this all the time. Good job. It does like that.
I'm going to start reinforcing. I should do that.
Yeah, I was reading this book on artificial intelligence a while back, and it was getting pretty technical, and then it referenced Skinner, and it said the origins of artificial intelligence, and specifically RLHF, reinforcement learning through human feedback, that has ties directly to Skinner's work. And I was like,
holy cow,
this is why AI makes sense in my brain.
Yeah,
it is. And so that's just testament to how applicable our training is to so many fields.
Yeah.
And so many fields are using the concepts that we use, as you said, calling them different things. I think about gamification. I mean, everything in technology is based on reinforcement of desired behavior, It is wild how many times once you get past the language barrier and you realize what they're saying and what that word means, and you're just able to just connect them just like that.
All right. So I owe our viewers one last secret word, and this is transparent. So TRANSPARENT. And again, thank you for joining us. Liz, thank you for joining us again. And those of you who enjoyed this episode with these two, don't worry. We'll be bringing them back on for future episodes as well as panelists, or who knows, maybe Liz will take that hot seat next time too. Okay, it won't be next time. We've already planned it. But thanks, everyone. Join us next time on the Behavioral View.
Thanks for joining us for the Behavioral View. Ready to lock in your CEU? Just follow the link below, complete the quiz, and enter the secret words. It's that easy. You've already done the work, so why not take the credit? Subscribe and join us for the next episode. We'll see you soon.